Let's talk a little college football here on 4Verts. My name is Harrison Graham. Just going final in Austin, Georgia, handling business against the number one ranked Texas Longhorns 30-15. The Dogs stormed out to a 23-0 halftime lead, and really just a vintage Kirby Smart defensive dominant performance. I think that's the story of the night here, that Kirby Smart outclassed and outcoached Steve Sarkisian pretty much from start to finish. Texas got it going a little bit in the second half, especially in that third quarter with a couple of touchdown drives, but in the end, this was a dominant Georgia display, led mostly by their defense because Carson Beck continues to be pretty mediocre at best. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Quinn Ewers briefly getting benched for Arch Manning. Lots to discuss, but before we do so, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button here on 4Verts. We will continue to bring you guys more NFL and college football news, reaction, big games, and a whole lot more. My thoughts and takeaways on everything surrounding both NFL and college football sports. So go ahead and subscribe. We're closing in on 4,000 subs. Let's make it happen. By the way, tomorrow, Sunday, we're going to do a little 4Verts live stream hangout during the noon games, maybe into the 3 o'clock games in the NFL, depending on how it's going. So stay tuned for that. All right, Georgia 30, Texas 15. I mentioned 23-0 at halftime. I thought something that stood out to me really from the beginning is how rattled Quinn Ewers looked. Texas dialed up a trick play early on in that game that was dropped that could have been a big play, maybe even a touchdown. And from that point forward, Ewers just never felt comfortable. Georgia's front was dominating a really good Texas offensive line. He was under pressure. He seemed to lock in on his first read. And I think something that doesn't get talked about enough is Steve Sarkisian does a really good job of getting Quinn into rhythm into these games with a lot of pre-snap motion, screen game, all that stuff, eye candy. Kirby Smart and this defense just sniffed that stuff out. The screen game wasn't working, the misdirection stuff, that was all being taken away. So to have success through the air in this one, Quinn was going to have to get to his second, third read, try to challenge Georgia downfield, and he just didn't really do that. Not very effectively. I mean, he ended up going 25 of 43 for 211, couple of touchdowns. Did fumble twice, threw a bad interception. I swear to God, he had like 4 picks dropped too. He was really bad. I thought he really struggled. You're going up against a good defense. It's not the end of the world. Texas doesn't have to have this game. I mean, they're number one. They'll drop to 3, 4, 5. I would imagine Georgia at number 5 jumps ahead of them. Obviously, has the head-to-head matchup, and it was dominant. But I would imagine Texas is still in the top 5. So this wasn't a had-to-have-it game. But now you've got a pretty crowded SEC there at the top to determine who's going to win this conference. And let's face it, you could very easily see a scenario where these two teams play again in the SEC championship game, and then potentially even a third time in the college football playoff. That is very much on the table. But I thought Kirby and the boys came ready to play. They were physical. They were flying around defensively. Carson Beck is not very good. So I don't view Georgia as like some indestructible number one team. We already saw them lose to Alabama, who's since lost twice. We'll get to them in a little bit. But I think when Georgia's locked in, they've got the most dominant defense with their personnel. I thought for the first time this year we saw that. And they could run the ball with Trevor Etienne. 19 carries, 87 yards, 3 touchdowns. If Beck can just stop turning the football over, Georgia's going to be tough to beat because they're so stout defensively. So I thought this was a big performance for Kirby and the boys. All year we've been hearing, Georgia's slipping a little bit. Texas team to beat in the SEC, and it's a little bit of a humble pie type of game for Texas. They're going to be fine, but, they got to regroup now. This is certainly a loss where they weren't that competitive in. But you look at the SEC now, just in conference record. Texas A&M actually on top at 4-0 in the conference. They play Texas later this year, so keep an eye on that. LSU now 3-0 in the conference. They took care of Arkansas tonight. Georgia at 4-1. Tennessee at 3-1. Mizzou, Texas, and Vanderbilt all at 2-1. Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, all at 2-2. Anyone below that's pretty much out of the mix. But Georgia came to play, and they were an underdog, which is rare under Kirby Smart, and they were dominant. They held Texas to how many total yards? 259. I think about 220 of that, or 200 of that was in the second half. So they just shut them down in the first half. And they shut down the run, too. 27 carries, 29 yards for Texas. Just not very effective at all on the ground. And again, I think for Sark, going back to the drawing board, when the run game isn't going and when the quick game screen stuff isn't working, can Quinn Ewers, be a guy that consistently gets to his second, third read and deliver the ball downfield? He had to for the first time tonight, and he was incapable of doing that consistently. So that's a bit of a concern moving forward. They briefly benched him for Arch Manning late in the first half. I think they were just trying to find a spark. He didn't score either, so they went back to Quinn in the second half. Found a couple of drives, but ultimately not enough. Before we go to Tennessee, Alabama, I did want to mention one thing. I saw something I've never seen before in college football tonight. Carson Beck threw an interception on the left sideline that was returned inside the 10. A great play by the Texas DB. They did call it defensive pass interference, which it was not, by the way. They blew the call, but they did call it. Guy ran it back. The Texas student section is launching bottles onto the field, and it's a whole scene for like 3 to 5 minutes. Steve Sarkisian's running over, telling the crowd, like, hey, cut that out. We're not going to do all that crap. And during that time where they were having to clear out the field, calm everything down, the officials got together and saw what we all saw at home, which was this was not DPI. This was a great play by the DB. They then decided to say, after further discussion, it was not pass interference. I'm glad they caught the call right, but Kirby went ballistic. And I don't blame him, because he's sitting there saying, you can't change the call after the fact. That is not a reviewable play. I have never seen that. If the bottles are not launched onto the field, that doesn't happen, because it gave the officials time to discuss it further, and they changed the call on the fly. Again, they got it right in the end, but that's not the process that is in place for that situation. Like, you're kind of opening up a tricky can of worms here, because pass interference has not been a reviewable play. Remember, they did it in the NFL one year. It was a disaster. They got rid of it. It didn't impact the game. Texas did score that drive to cut it to 23-15, and then Georgia with a huge response, couple of big plays. Beck, who struggled tonight, hit a big 3rd and 10. Then they ran a little flea flicker for about 30 more yards, got them into range, and then they ended up punching it in. So, it didn't really end up being a big storyline, but imagine if Texas had come back. They'd cut it to 1 score. I mean, that would have been a wild sequence, but I can't say I've ever seen that one before. So that was fascinating, to say the least. All right, let's talk Tennessee, Alabama, then we'll get into some hot seat discussion. A couple of the coaches I'm keeping an eye on. Bizarre game here. I thought Sean McDonough, the play-by-play guy, put it really well. He said, I wouldn't call this one an instant classic, but definitely a close and entertaining game. I think combined penalties here, let me pull up the numbers just so I get this right. 26 penalties for 210 yards between the two teams. Alabama alone, 15 penalties, 115 yards. They shut out Tennessee in the first half, 7-0. But Tennessee has something that I can't recall them ever having, especially under Josh Heupel, an offensive coach. A dominant defense. They are dominant. Defensive line is dominant. They got a few first-round picks in there. They have a couple young corners who are really physical. I mean, they just completely held Jalen Milroe in check. Picked him off a couple of times, sacked him several times, shut down the run, 75 yards on 34 carries for Bama. Milroe was 25 of 45 for 239 passing. I look at Tennessee right now, and Nico Iamaleava hit a couple of downfield throws in the second half to a beautiful slot fade for a touchdown to take the lead, 21-17. Then they added the late field goal to make it a full touchdown advantage before they picked off Milroe to seal it. I look at Tennessee right now, and I'm like, that's a national championship defense. It really is. That's a top 5 defense in college football. Can Nico and the offense find some consistency? Because At times, it looks really good. Nico's big. He's got a strong arm. He can throw with velocity, throw with touch. Problem is, he's airmailing balls left and right. He's very up and down. And look, first-year starter, second year in the program. I understand. I don't expect him to, go win the Heisman Trophy or something like that. But if he can be 10 to 20% more consistent with the way they can run the ball with Dylan Sampson, $140 on 26 carries, 2 touchdowns tonight. Nico, 14 of 27. Like, if those 14 of 27s can turn into 19 of 27, 20 of 27, like, you're going to be tough to beat because this defense is very good. And that's something Heupel hasn't had. Like, the game 2 years ago against Alabama was a better, more entertaining game, but it was 52-49. They could not stop Bryce Young. They shut down Jalen Milroe on this Bama offense today. And, the defense is really good. The offense is kind of average. They can run the ball and they can hit some big plays with Nico, but it's very hit and miss. A lot of 3-and-outs. Nico puts the ball in harm's way a decent amount of the time. So, I look at Tennessee with 5 games to go, potentially 6, if they make the SEC championship game. They've got Kentucky and Mississippi State at home, 2 games they'll be favored in. At Georgia, UTEP at home, at Vanderbilt. Tricky game at Vandy. I think if they go 3-1 the rest of the way, 4-1, get to 10-2, I think they're pretty safely a playoff team. Like, to me, I look at them like, you got 5-6 weeks to figure out the offense. Can the offense turn it up a notch? Because if it can, this is a team that, if they get the right draw, could win the whole thing with that defense. And they have enough talent on offense with Brew McCoy, Sampson. Nico's obviously very talented. He's just very up and down. Squirrel White. They've got dudes. Can they put it all together offensively? If they can, I think they have a chance to do real damage in the playoff. On the flip side, Bama is in major trouble. They've lost 2 out of 3 since beating Georgia. And let's face it, if they played Georgia again, would anybody pick them? After the first quarter and a half, Georgia really was the better team. They just got blown out 28-0 in 20 minutes. And they came back to take the lead before Milroe hit Ryan Williams on that deep ball to win the game late. I view Georgia as a much more serious team right now, better on defense. I would still take Milroe over Beck, but outside of Milroe and Ryan Williams, that offense is just, they don't have that many playmakers, whereas Georgia can spread it out a little bit. Etienne can run the ball. Clearly, they're better on defense. I would take Kirby over DeBoer right now. I look at Georgia as a more serious contender. Bama right now, they probably have to win out to make the playoff. If they lose one more game, I don't see how you could justify putting them in. I guess that win over Georgia is going to carry a lot of weight, but they got Mizzou at home next week, who Mizzou hasn't been great, barely won again today, but still a top 25 team. At LSU in 2 weeks, I would lean LSU in that game right now. Mercer, classic late season FCS opponent. At Oklahoma, Auburn at home. They should win both those games. So the next 2 weeks are big. Can you beat Mizzou? Can you win at LSU? If you win those 2 games, you're probably going to win out. At 10-2, you'd probably make the playoffs. So Bama's not done, but their margin for error might be 0 now. Because if they lose 3 games, I get it. 3-loss teams are going to make the playoffs some years. But I look at this and I'm like, does this look like a playoff team? Like, to me, it does not. So big couple of weeks coming up for Bama. I know folks are upset with DeBoer and everything. The main thing with them is they're just undisciplined. So many penalties. That was the issue against Vandy as well. Should have lost to South Carolina last week, who, by the way, stomped Oklahoma. We'll talk about Brent Venables in a second. But, yeah, Bama with 2 losses. Margin of error is shrinking by the week. Okay, Lincoln Riley hot seat. USC finds a way to blow it again. Up 21-7 at Maryland, a not very good Maryland team. Lose 29-28. And now Lincoln is 5-9 in his last 14 games. How long ago does that win over LSU feel in week 1 in Vegas? Would anybody pick them to beat LSU if they played again? I think they'd lose by 3 touchdowns. I really do. This just has not worked, man. It has not worked. That first year there, Caleb Williams went ballistic, and they almost won the Pac-12. That team was not that talented. It had Caleb, Jordan Addison, and a couple other players. Last year, they lost a bunch of tight games, lost 5 out of 6 in the year. People were like, this is maybe this is a Caleb Williams issue. He's a prima donna, all this stuff. Well, I think it's a talent issue, and maybe it's a coaching issue. Lincoln Riley does not look like a good fit in LA. It has never felt like a good fit. He can't close the games out. All of a sudden, the defense looks like the defense of old. They're just not very good. They're not very good. And with what they're paying him, 3-4 is not what you signed up for. Losing 9 out of 14 games is not what you signed up for if you're USC. And I think Caleb Williams was covering up a lot of weaknesses on that team. I think that's pretty clear. You watch them play. They suck on the offensive line. The defense lacks talent. Miller Moss is a fine college player, but he's not dynamic. It's just, where's the talent? It's year 3, Lincoln. You've got Southern California to recruit from. You've got the transfer portal. You've got the USC brand. Clay Helton, I saw this stat, was 24-10 in his first 34 games. They ran him out of town. Lincoln's 22-12. And he's lost 9 out of 14. This thing is just off the rails. I don't know where this goes from here. I don't know what his buyout situation is, but I can't imagine he holds very much power at this point in terms of his status within the program. And then his old place isn't any better. Like, you wonder if both sides had a redo. Would he just stay at Oklahoma? He's a small Texas kid, had it rolling there. Just a better fit, it felt like. Brent Venables, he's just not a head coach. Like, Lincoln Riley, he will get another shot, clearly. I mean, this guy was playing in the college football playoff, winning Big 12 titles left and right. He will be a Power 4 head coach next year, whether it's at USC or somewhere else. Now, maybe he just says, screw it, I'm going to go the Kingsbury route and go call plays in the NFL. But if he wants to be a Power 4 head coach somewhere, he will be. I don't think Brent Venables would be if he got fired. And again, I'm not saying these guys are going to get fired, but I think clearly their seats are heating up. Oklahoma got embarrassed at home by South Carolina, 35-9. They bench Michael Hawkins, go back to Jackson Arnold, burn his red shirt in what might be a meaningless season. Venables now 20-13 as the Sooners head coach. Remember, they made the decision to kind of run Dylan Gabriel out of there. Hey, we're going to go to Jackson Arnold. Well, Dylan Gabriel and Oregon are going to be number 1 when we wake up tomorrow after Texas lost. You know, you play this game with the portal, not just the players, these teams. I said this last week. Teams are pushing players to the portal as well. Don't blame the players for everything. It is happening. Hey, you're not going to play here. Go into the portal. It happens. Jackson Arnold was going to be the guy, and he doesn't look the part. Michael Hawkins doesn't look the part. Oklahoma has had a ton of injuries to the offensive line and receiving core, which could buy Venables another year. I don't think Lincoln has those excuses in LA. But if I'm an Oklahoma booster, and I know Texas lost tonight, but if I'm comparing myself to Texas, who I got blown out by last week, who was number 1 before losing today, we're nowhere near them if I'm an Oklahoma fan, right? Year 1 of the SEC, after years of dominating the Big 12, being much better than Texas, by the time you went to the SEC, Texas was built to have much more success right away than you were. That can't make OU boosters and alums happy. So I would not be shocked if they pulled the plug on this thing because they don't feel close. They're not physical. Even the defense is starting to slip under Venables, which is the one thing he could kind of hold on to. Like, hey, I get the offense is a mess, but we've had injuries. The defense is competing. You're giving up 35 to South Carolina at home. Like, the defense isn't that good either. Like, it's better than what it was under Lincoln Riley, but the offense is so bad that it's clearly a downgrade overall. It's just America's new favorite game. Will Lincoln Riley or Brent Venables get fired first? Because I think both are in major, major trouble. All right, little college football reaction from Week 8. Lots going on. We got NFL Week 7 coverage tomorrow here on the channel, so subscribe. Join us live. Plan is to go live for the noon game, so rock and roll with us for that. My name is Harrison Graham. We'll see you guys soon here on 4 Verts.